Hey, what's going on YouTube? It's Josh from Crack MTG here, and today we're going to be playing some Mono Blue Storm. This is a super fun and fast deck that uses Sapphire Medallion and Helm of Awakening to reduce the cost of our spells, and then Meditate and Deep Analysis and Frantic Search to draw cards, and Cloud of Fairies with the Frantic Search and Snap to ramp with our mana and our cost reduction to eventually kill with a Brain Freeze, milling our opponent's entire deck. Should be a lot of fun. Game 1 here, we have a pretty okay 7, so we will keep. We are definitely looking to spike a second land though. Opponent has a turn 1 Dark Ritual into a Douthie Slayer, so this could already be a lot of pressure, and another creature, a Carnophage, so 4 power already. We do spike our second land though, so I'm just going to slam this Helm of Awakening, hoping to go off on this next turn. Opponent plays a Cabal Therapy, so they're going to be able to interact with our hand. They name Miscalculation, which is going to be a miss. They end up playing Sarcomancy to get another 2/2 body, so 6 power already on the second turn, but they're going to flash back the Therapy, naming Cloud of Fairies, so potentially disrupting our combo, but I think we can still go for a little something here. We draw a Snap, so we'll cast this Lotus Petal and then start using these snaps to ramp my mana with the Helm of Awakening and these islands, and also buy a little bit of time getting rid of these creatures. And now with this extra mana, I can cast this Meditate. Teferi's Isle is a really good draw. We can actually ramp even more now with all of our untap effects. I'm going to go for a Frantic Search. We find a second Merchant Scroll, so I'm now able to potentially find some Brain Freezes, but I don't quite have enough Storm, so I'm going to have to go for another Meditate first. And the Meditate spikes some more untap effects, which should now almost certainly get us there. We can use the Cloud of Fairies to make even more mana with our Teferi's Isle, and then go for this Frantic Search to make even more mana. Now this Snap can bounce the Cloud of Fairies to make even more mana, and all we really have to do is find some sort of extra Brain Freeze effect off of these two Sleight of Hands. So we find, oh, and there is the Brain Freeze, so now we can just Merchant Scroll for a second Brain Freeze, and then these 2 Brain Freezes is going to be enough, and opponent scoops it up. So against these kind of black duress style decks that are kind of aggressive, we don't have too much in the sideboard, so I'm just going to resubmit. Nothing too helpful against this type of strategy. Opponent has another pretty fast start with a turn 1 Carnophage. We're able to keep a 7, but we are looking for a second land off of this Sleight of Hand, but we find it. Opponent's going to be taking 1 off their Carnophage on upkeep. Plays a Rancor, so they're going to be getting in pretty fast here. And a Gemstone Mine into a Duress, so they're also able to interact with our hand a little bit. And I'm currently on a 5-turn clock with this Carnophage swinging in for 4 a turn. They take Snap with the Duress. I have a second land, and opponent plays a second Rancor on the Carnophage, swinging in for 6 a turn now. Opponent plays a Withered Wretch. I'm gonna go ahead and Merchant Scroll here, and I think I'm gonna grab a Snap in order to buy a little bit of time against this Carnophage. I should get an entire extra turn with this. Opponent swings in for 8. I'm gonna snap the Carnophage here. The Rancors will go back to hand though, so he's able to redeploy and potentially get lethal set up for next turn. He replays the Carnophage and casts a second Withered Wretch. I'm going to go for an opt on end step here. I will take another island. Should help us go off on this turn. Now I'm going to play land, and I think I'm going to start ramping with this Frantic Search. I think I can get rid of this opt here and potentially this Merchant Scroll. I just don't think I have enough mana to support it. And now I can go for a Meditate to draw 4, and then I still have enough to go for a Frantic Search here to ramp even more. I can get rid of this Deep Analysis as well for even more card advantage. I can now flash back the Deep Analysis for only 1 mana, And now with this Cloud of Fairies and the Snap, I should have a ton of extra mana. I have these 2 Brain Freezes, and I have the Meditate as well. So this game is essentially over. I can go for a Meditate here, but really it doesn't matter what I do. I have a Frantic Search to ramp, I have this Cloud of Fairies, I have the Snap. So much mana here. I'm going to ramp by casting the Snap on the Cloud of Fairies. I can ramp even more off of this Frantic Search, discarding these extra islands that I don't need. And now I can just go for a Brain Freeze, let the Storm happen, same targets, mill the opponent, and second Brain Freeze is the kill. GG's against green-black, people are calling this broccoli soup, and super cool list by the opponent. You can see Hidden Gibbons or something maybe they boarded in. Super fun game. GG. Game 2 here, we have a pretty keepable 7, so we will try it out. Turn 1, I can get a Sleight of Hand. I will take the Snap. We're really just looking for any sort of engine piece because we have all of these cost reducers. Opponent looks like they're on mono black Clerics with this Dark Supplicant here. We'll just go for a Sapphire Medallion to start getting our cost reduction ready. Opponent swings in for 1. And it looks like they have a Withered Wretch to follow up. We draw a 3rd land, so now I'm able to actually go for both of these mana reducers because the Helm of Awakening actually reduces Sapphire Medallions as well. And opponent will swing in for 3. And cast a Priest of Gix. So our Helm of Awakening did actually ramp them there, able to cast all of these spells. And a Cabal Therapy, that could be pretty problematic. Let's see what they name. Parallax Tide. Fair enough, that's a very popular card in the format, but we don't have it in our deck today. They don't end up going for a flashback, but we spike Meditate off the top, and remember all of our spells here essentially only cast 1 because of all these cost reducers. We're just looking for action here with that opt, and we find Frantic Search, which was great, which actually spikes a Meditate as well, which is amazing. So now we can draw a whole bunch of cards here, and then we have these snaps to ramp us. The Merchant Scroll can go grab a Frantic Search to ramp even more. And I already have 2 Brain Freezes in hand, which I'm pretty sure at this point is already lethal. But I can go for a Cloud of Fairies and Snap to ramp even more. And I also have this Frantic Search if I would like to draw even more cards, grabbing like a Meditate. But I'm just going to ramp even more with this Snap, and now I can just kill them with these 2 Brain Freezes. Awesome, and now we'll just pass the turn. Opponent looks like they're on mono black Clerics. Super cool little build here. Definitely need to be worried about Duresses and Cabal Therapies, but once again, I feel like this is the style of deck where I don't have anything to board in. Definitely thinking about how the board could be improved to deal with Duress style decks. Opponent, no turn 1 play. We have a pretty slow hand here, but we can potentially sculpt and get some card advantage going with Deep Analysis. And Meditate is definitely one of our best engine cards. They have a Powder Keg, which could potentially get rid of one of our mana rocks should we draw them. We draw a Lotus Petal though, so we'll just keep playing out our lands and waiting a little bit. Opponent takes up Powder Keg, plays land, and plays a Duress, so they'll get to peek at our hand here. They end up taking a Brain Freeze, which is probably the correct take, and play Withered Wretch, so they have some pressure being applied. I'm going to play an island, a Lotus Petal, and I'm going to go for the front side of Deep Analysis. It's going to force them to use their Withered Wretch to get rid of it on the flashback. And set me up here to go off with Meditates, and this Teferi's Isle can potentially take the place of a mana rock by allowing our untap effects to generate mana because the Teferi's Isle taps for 2. However, I think I'm just going to go for an island here and play it a little bit safe. I'm going to go for a Sleight of Hand and go for it next turn potentially. Just grabbing a Merchant Scroll to set up even further. Opponent takes up the Powder Keg to 2, so that could potentially interact with things like Cloud of Fairies and all of our mana rocks. And then opponent plays a Cabal Archon and swings in for 4. I draw a Cloud of Fairies, so I'm going to drop the Teferi's Isle, and I think it's time to start going for it. So I'm going to start off on this Frantic Search, which generates 1 mana by untapping the Teferi's Isle. I draw a Deep Analysis, which I can discard, and then use the Flashback to generate some card advantage. I'm going to cast this Cloud of Fairies, which will allow me to untap my mana and go for a Meditate. Now I have these Helm of Awakenings, which I can play and reduce the cost of my cards. They're going to have to crack this Powder Keg here now once I go for this Cloud of Fairies. Opponent chooses to first activate their Cabal Archon, sacrificing the Withered Wretch, which makes sense because it would die to this Powder Keg activation here. Now our Cloud of Fairies enters and can untap the Teferi's Isle and an island. So now I'm back up to 3 mana. I can replay a Helm of Awakening. And now Snap generates 2 mana because it untaps the Teferi's Isle and only costs 1. And then I can generate 2 more mana with this Cloud of Fairies, untapping the Teferi's Isle. Just so much mana here at this point, and now I can go for a Frantic Search, untapping even more mana. And now I can actually just keep this Brain Freeze and this Merchant Scroll for a second Brain Freeze, and then double Brain Freeze is the kill here on our opponent. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Find the second Brain Freeze. First one, Storm, same targets all across. And second one, trigger Storm, and that should be the game. 2-0 against Mono Black Clerics. Super cool little deck our opponent was playing, but looked like it just wasn't quite fast enough. And from what I've been seeing, our deck seems to be pretty good against these duress style, aggressive style strategies. But GG's opponent. And going into game 3, we're playing against Desmond. I don't think that first hand is very good, so I decided to mulligan it. This second hand is not very good, but I think it's a little bit better than a mulligan to 5. So I will try it. I have an island to start. Opponent plays Swamp into Dark Ritual into a Hypnotic Spectre. That is a super fast start. I'm going to opt on his end step. But this is actually super interesting. We find Cloud of Fairies. And with the first Cloud of Fairies, I actually am able to double Cloud of Fairies in order to block this Hypnotic Spectre. So that's what I'm going to go for. Hopefully that trade favors us. It is going to be a pretty even trade because they lose the Dark Ritual and the Hypnotic Spectre, and we just lose 2 Cloud of Fairies, so it's a 2 for 2. And then we also get to find a Meditate off of this sleight of hand, which is definitely one of our best engine cards. Opponent has a Plains in their deck, so it looks like some sort of Dead Guy Ale variant. They swing in, we're going to go for the block, and we do get the trade. Opponent follows up with a Gerard's Verdict, though, so we are going to lose 2 of our cards, going down to just this Meditate to go off with. Find a Merchant Scroll. I'm going to cast that now and find a Frantic Search. I think that's the best thing to combo with our Meditate, and it sets us up to try to go off with just another land here, or maybe like a Teferi's Isle or any Mana Rock would do. Opponent plays the Rack, so this is sort of a more discard-based Dead Guy Ale strategy. And then they Cabal Therapy away at the Frantic Search that they knew about. We draw a Helm of Awakening, which we will cast here. Opponent plays Enlightened Tutor on end step and grab his Bottomless Pit. And that's what they spend their turn casting. And then passing back here, so on my upkeep, in response to this Bottomless Pit trigger, which would make me discard my Meditate, I'm just going to cast it and cash in my 4 cards. I end up discarding this to Teferi's Isle, but I don't have to take any damage from the rack. I'm just going to make my land drop and then pass back. Opponent will get 2 turns here now because we cast the Meditate. They draw Sabo's Web, which will draw them another card, which finds them a Ravenous Rat, so I'm going to have to discard. I think I can get rid of this Snap here. It's not too useful. And now opponent's going to go to their next turn where they don't have to discard because they were all out of cards. They draw Swamp for turn, and now they get to swing in for 1, and now it's going to come back to me. Upkeep, I'm going to be discarding to this Bottomless Pit. I lose the island, and then I take a couple damage from this rack. I draw a second opt. I'm just going to pass back here and wait a little bit before trying to go for anything. Opponent draws a land and swings in for 1 with their Ravenous Rats. I discard one of these opts and take 2. I'm going to go for an opt now, hoping to draw something like a Meditate. We find a Merchant Scroll, which essentially represents a Meditate, so that's perfect. I'm going to Merchant Scroll, find Meditate, cast Lotus Petal, and then cast this Meditate. getting a land drop, so I'll play that. And now I can go for this sleight of hand. I end up finding a Frantic Search, so that's what I'll take. I think that should set us up to hopefully go off on our next turn with this Frantic Search and the Brain Freeze. Opponent has nothing to discard on their upkeep, and their draw is a Duress, so that's actually a super good piece of interaction to take away that Frantic Search. And now they're going to swing in with the Rats, and they're going to get an extra turn here because we used Meditate. They're going to go for a flashback on the Cabal Therapy, which will take our Brain Freeze as well. And now, once again, they have nothing to discard, but they just draw a land for turn. We will untap. We're going to have to discard this Helm of Awakening and take a few damage from the rack, but we draw a Merchant Scroll, which is super strong. We're going to be able to go find this Meditate, which we will cast, drawing us 4 more cards. And now this Deep Analysis is also very strong. I can go for a Lotus Petal as well, so I can cast it, and then I'll have the backside as well to use to try to go off on my next turn. Although opponent will get 2 turns here because we used a Meditate. I'm going to cast out this Lotus Petal, and then also we drew a Brain Freeze, so I'm able to go for a small Brain Freeze here to start milling our opponent. I'll only have 1 Brain Freeze left in deck, but hopefully I can use this Deep Analysis in my graveyard to try to go for something to mill the rest of my opponent's deck. They have a Ravenous Rats for turn, and that makes us discard our land. And then they get a second turn as well because we used a Meditate. They don't play their card, they just swing in with their Rats, putting us down to 7. And then passing back. So we get to untap, take 3 from the rack, and now I draw a Meditate as well, which is super good. So I'm going to flash back this Deep Analysis for just 1 mana, putting myself down to 1. And now Frantic Search and Cloud of Fairies both make even more mana, and the Meditate makes me get a bunch of cards into hand. So I think this should be a super quick game, but I am going to need to find a Brain Freeze to actually finish the game out, or a Merchant Scroll to find the Brain Freeze. I can discard these medallions, they don't help me anymore, but now we just have Cloud of Fairies and Snap, so I'm going to cycle Cloud of Fairies, hoping to find more card draw. We find a Frantic Search, so I can use Cloud of Fairies and Snap to generate mana. But this Frantic Search does need to find some sort of way to mill our opponent. We need our last Brain Freeze. Opponent has a Swords Plowshares for our Cloud of Fairies, so I can't actually use my Snaps to make mana anymore with that. We'll untap our lands and go for this Frantic Search, trying to find a Brain Freeze, and there it is. Awesome. So now we can discard these lands, we don't need them, untap our lands, snap back this Ravenous Rats, and then afterwards we can go for a Brain Freeze, and Storm will be 8. 8 times 3 is 24. Opponent has 23 cards in deck, so that will be game 1 against this black-white rack version of Dead Guy Ale. Once again, our sideboard isn't looking great for any of these style of decks. The discard effects we don't have much on our sideboard for. I'm going to mull my first hand, it had no lands, but our second hand is pretty strong. I'm going to put back a Cloud of Fairies, playing around Duress with these 2 medallions. Opponent has a turn 1 Ritual into a Hypnotic Spectre. We can go for a land, Lotus Petal, and slam a turn 1 Sapphire Medallion. And now hopefully that can let us go off through this Hypnotic Spectre. Opponent follows up with a Cabal Therapy. Let's see what they name. It's going to be Meditate, which makes sense. That was definitely our card that we used as our engine last game. Opponent swings in with the Hypnotic Spectre and makes us discard our second medallion. We draw a Snap, which is actually incredibly strong because we can bounce the Hypnotic Spectre, and opponent is currently only on 1 land, so hopefully they will not be able to recast it, so that's what I'm going to go for once they swing in. But opponent has a follow-up Dark Ritual, so they're able to recast the Hypnotic Spectre. So I'm going to use this Opt on end steps to try to find something, and I find a Meditate, which is super strong. I can actually potentially just overwhelm this Hypnotic Spectre by putting too many cards in my hand. And I find a Snap as well, which can actually bounce it a second time. But opponent will get 2 turns to work with here because I used a Meditate, but I am going to be able to snap back the Hypnotic Spectre and go for a Sleight of Hand and a Frantic Search. I find a Sapphire Medallion, so I'm going to commit to using these 2 medallions to try to go off in the future. So I'm going to cast the second medallion and then cast the Sleight of Hand, looking for something like a Meditate, which is actually exactly what we find. So now, hopefully on my next turn, I will be able to go for a Meditate for just 1 mana and then start storming off. Opponent has a Disenchant though for one of the medallions, so they will destroy it. and they untap and they find a third land, so they're able to recast the Hypnotic Spectre that I've bounced twice so far. But I do now have the Meditate to start going off with, which will cost 2, and I find even more Meditates, so I'm just going to cast another one and hope that we can overwhelm this Hypnotic Spectre by just having too many cards in hand. Opponent plays a land and then plays a Gerard's Verdict, so I'm going to discard both of my Deep Analysis, and now opponent's going to start swinging with the Hypnotic Spectre and taking even more cards from hand, but I'm hoping to use these Deep Analysis flashback to try to storm off after our opponent goes through these extra turns here. They play a Bottomless Pit, so they're going to get even more discard, and the Hypnotic Spectre connects. And now opponent goes to their last extra turn. They find a land for turn and swing in one more time. I'm going to lose this Helm of Awakening, and now I just have this Teferi's Isle and the Meditate to go off with. In response to the Bottomless Pit discard, I'm going to go for the Meditate, and now the Bottomless Pit's discard will be less meaningful. I find these Cloud Fairies and the Frantic Search to gain even more mana, which is awesome. And don't forget, I have these Deep Analysis in my graveyard, which I can flash back for just 1 mana each. So that's exactly what I'll do. I'll flash back the first one, which finds 2 lands, and flashing back the second one finds 2 even more lands. But the Teferi's Isle is nice because it nets extra mana, so now this Cloud of Fairies actually generates 2 mana every time. So I'm going to cast the Cloud of Fairies, and now Frantic Search finds these snaps, and I can untap even more mana, but I do need to find some sort of action spell, so I'm going to cast the Sleight of Hand, which finds a second Sleight of Hand. I need to find some sort of action off of this, and I do find a Merchant Scroll, which is perfect, because now I can cast a bunch of spells here using these snaps to bounce the Cloud of Fairies, and then casting these Cloud of Fairies over and over again, casting the Helm of Awakening. I will have a ton of Storm, which I can use for this Brain Freeze that I find off the Merchant Scroll. So that's exactly what I'll do. I'll snap the Cloud of Fairies back to hand, cast this Helm of Awakening, and now recast this Cloud of Fairies and start casting the Snap. And this will generate even more mana every single time because of the Teferi's Isle tapping for 2. And we'll lastly recast this Cloud of Fairies, Storm 14, and now I can go for this Brain Freeze, Storm 15. 15 times 3 is 45. Opponent will be down to 2 cards in deck, and with my 6 life, opponent scoops it up. They have nothing that'll get them out. So, GG's. This was a super fun deck. I was very impressed with the card Meditate. It was very impactful. Also Deep Analysis. The sideboard was not very great. I would like to see more stuff against these kind of aggressive strategies. But thanks for watching. Have a good one, you guys. I'll see you later.